Okay.
So yeah, no, that's it. Full screen, is that? Okay. Right, thanks, Claire, for the introduction. Good setting there, and Fraser, thank you as well. Right, so that's the title. I actually used this as a Kilmarnock District History Group, but what I'm going to put up relates to probably the average job in some way who's here today. So the title there, 1970s Kilmarnock, Utopia and Dystopia. You might wonder, why am I starting there? Well, it's pretty key to where we are in the town centre today. The 1970s in Kilmarnock was the single biggest change we've ever had in the town, and we see the effects today. And the name there, Percy Johnson Marshall, you'll find out a little bit more about him. So, was what happened in the 1970s Utopia or Dystopia? When I was studying all this and putting it together, probably the answer lies somewhere in between here. But what I'd like you to do is you make up your own mind when you finish the presentation today. And as Claire says, I'm going to stop at bits and bring you in with kind of certain points, etc. So, what we need to do, first of all, is take a wee trip back in time. So, Kilmarnock is actually a really, really old town. It goes back about 1,000 years. There was monks who'd come over from Ireland that were based at Kilwinning Abbey, and they started to move out over Ayrshire. And there was one called Marnock who arrived in Kilmarnock. Nice setting. The town centre sits in a small glacial valley, and you've got a river there you can see shaded in blue running through the town. So the monks thought, around about the year 1000, it was a great place to set up a small community, which was the church, and the church is the Lay Kirk. So that was really the starting point. And over hundreds of years, it grew very, very, very slowly. So maps really came about in the early 1800s, and these are in the National Map Library in Edinburgh. You can just source them online. So we're at 1808, and what we've got here is the river's going to be in all these maps, obviously. So the top corner, you're coming through the Cave Park, and then when it takes a bend at kind of right angles, that's you going through the town centre. I don't want you to focus on all the detail. I want you just to look at the bits I point out, i.e. the bits I've coloured in with pens. The red line is the road going through Kilmarnock at the time. That was the main road, or rather cart track from Ayr to Kilmarnock, and it went up the sandbed, which is still there, so you can see in the bottom bit, it's following the line of the river, over the wee bridge, which is still there at Loudon, then on to Glasgow. Ayr to Glasgow in these days would maybe take you 2 days. So the horse and carts would maybe stop off in the way. The Wheat Sheaf and Kilmarnock, what you tend to call Witherspoons, the older bit there, and also the King's Arms and Fenwick, these were coaching in. So Kilmarnock was a real small huddle. You can see it round about the kind of cross area. Where the mouse is, that's the Lay Kirk in the cross there. If you go back to the 1600s, there was a great fire. It was just really wooden houses. 600 wooden houses get destroyed, and everybody was displaced for a while. So we've got that history there. So what I want to do is move on. So we're into the Industrial Revolution now, and all of a sudden, you can still see the line of the river. The town's changed. It's built up through industry and commerce. Again, I just want you to focus on the red line. That's King Street and Portland Street. The Duke of Portland owned all the land round about Kilmarnock. He built pretty much a straight road right through what would be the town centre. So the sandbed's still there, but we're not using it as much. Same map, but what I want you to do is if you come over to the right, if I use a laser here, you've got a wee road I've shaded in red and down there. That's actually Green Street, which is still there today. And that's going up to the Lade side. There was tanneries there, that's why that was built. And down here, that's Clark Street. That's the old Tesco's. And the reason that was built is to get into the Newton where some of the overspill housing was. Now, these roads don't look really significant, but it's part of a jigsaw I'm building up here. So that's 1857. But notice in the middle, there's no connection. What I've done next is, it might not be too apparent, I've shaded some bits of green. You might not be able to see them quite well. That's all the east-west connections. So you've got King Street and Portland Street, all these east-west connections in green. These are really narrow roads. And the light green is London Road, which just stops at Green Street. Up to 1896, moving on. All of a sudden, Glenfinnie Street appears. Glenfinnie Street didn't exist up to then. It was about maybe 1860 it was built. Glenfinnie was a coal merchant, made a fortune, built Glenfinnie Street. His crowning building was Opera House, where some of you might be based. King Street, and then you've got Clark Street and Green Street. But notice now you've joined them up. That's Waterloo Street. So that bit is joined up, quite significant. And London Road's got an extension in light green called Duke Street. It goes to the cross. That's across there. There's a look at. These are all these other green, small, interconnecting roads. None of these exist now, or maybe just one of them that exists. So that last map's 1896. The town up to the 1970s, a road layout didn't really change very much. And funnily enough, in 1896, the first motor car appeared in Kilmarnock, just coincidence there, and it was built by Dick Brothers Garage, which was the biggest car garage in Kilmarnock. Doesn't exist anymore. So moving on the timeline, I don't need to read all this, so any list I won't. The motor cars were building up and up. So by the time you get to 1950s, the town's getting quite congested. So there was a plan in 1955, and they decided to build a bypass, and that's the Western Wood in Kilmarnock. It goes down by the recycling centre. It was 2-lane, going down Knockinlaw, thank, but it was never finished. It just stops at Bonneton. So not very good. It helped a wee bit. Into the mid-60s, the motor car is exploding, growing exponentially. The main street in Kilmarnock is absolutely clogged with cars. So the Borough Council at the time says we need to do something here. We need to actually try and solve this massive traffic problem, because it was stopping commerce and it was creating kind of a lot of problems in terms of the growth of the town. So in 1966, the town council, it's Kilmarnock Borough Council then, commissioned Percy Johnson Marshall, that was in the title there, to prepare a plan, and it was to deal with traffic. It was mainly traffic to deal with, but it had massive spill-on effects as well. So you might think this presentation is all going to be about roads. It's not. The main thing is what we are going to do for the 70s is because of roads and traffic congestion. Highly regarded, and he did the work in Kilmarnock. So these are the places that he actually, his company, Associates, did a lot of work. So there's quite a wee bit in Britain, and you can see there, he also did Sao Paulo in Brazil, and the new capital of Pakistan, Islamabad. So probably that's the first and last time you'll maybe see Kilmarnock, Islamabad and Sao Paulo in the same page there. Also, Edinburgh University, that's quite significant as well. I'll come back to that too. So what was his major influences? Right, this is happening 20 years after World War II. World War II and the Luftwaffe bombings had a massive effect. So there wasn't much bombing in Kilmarnock. It was one house in Culzean Crescent, but it's had an effect in Kilmarnock. Rotterdam in Holland, Coventry, and then in London, 4 areas of London. London got a hiding for the Luftwaffe, especially out the East End. So St Paul's Precinct out the East End, that's the area around about St Paul's Cathedral. That was lucky to survive the bombing. The Barbican out the East End, Elephant and Castle south of the river, and another area called Lansbury. These were just wiped out in the war and cleared. Lansbury, better known as Tower Hamlets, I'm sure quite a few of you have heard of that. So that's where he worked, and he did a lot of work in Coventry. So I'll come to that in a wee minute. So what were the major influences? Well, what I did was, actually, quite hard to get this. He actually wrote a book in academic as well, rebuilding our cities, and I get quite a few ideas and theories out of that. Again, I'm not really going to go through the list there. Every one of these things in that list happened in Kilmarnock apart from one thing, and that's graded junctions. A graded junction is like Belfield Interchange, where you're going up the A77, you don't have to come off it, right, to make the traffic flow quicker. They wanted graded junctions in Kilmarnock, but they're quite simple, there isn't any room. Graded junctions take a lot of space, but everything else in that list was planned for Kilmarnock. And there's maybe some surprises in that list, like low-rise. You might think 60s high-rise, but it was low-rise. Spires, church spires, that maybe doesn't fit in with the 60s. Well, there's plenty of concrete, obviously. Trees and landscape, and that was quite key as well. But you've got other things there, like shopping under one roof. You can see where that was going. Multiple stores rather than individual stores. Underpasses, overpasses, walkways, multi-storey, pedestrianization. They were massive things in the 60s and 70s, but now today, especially those of you involved in planning things in Kilmarnock, a lot of these things are completely out of fashion, out of date, especially with placemaking. A lot of these things don't fit in. Precincts was good. That's come from an American term. Civic, shopping and cultural. They wanted to separate these out. They weren't to be combined. That's where the term delineation comes in, and zoning. I'll cover all these at certain bits in the talk, ring roads as well. So what I want to do is I want to take a wee sidetrack to one of these key projects, Coventry. So Coventry is about 7 times the size of Kilmarnock. It's pretty near Birmingham. That's where the M6 kind of finishes up. So Percy Johnson Marshall in 1938, he was working in Coventry, started to come up in planning. He planned the first traffic-free shopping centre in Britain. Coventry was a right old medieval city. You could hardly get any cars into the city centre. So they thought, take cars out the city centre. And the plans were all in place. And then the war breaks out 1939. Coventry, very industrial as well. So the Luftwaffe in 1940 targeted it. Massive bombing raid in 1940, planes coming over from northern France. Central Coventry is more or less wiped out. Percy was living in Coventry at the time and his house was destroyed. He's then sent away to fight in the war in India and Burma, comes back in 1945 when the war's ended, and they've got a blank canvas for Coventry. So they're thinking, let's start to put these plans in place. And he got a lot of his ideas for Rotterdam. Now, Rotterdam, again, when the Germans invaded Holland and Belgium, the first day of the invasion of Holland, they targeted Rotterdam because it's a massive port and they flattened it in just one afternoon, but they didn't touch Amsterdam. Now I went to Rotterdam in 1992, I think, if I remember correctly, and Rotterdam is like Cumbernauld in steroids. It's just all concrete, all the things you wouldn't like, whereas Amsterdam's completely different. And that's where he was getting a lot of his ideas for Coventry. So what he did in Coventry was, by the late 50s, they had an inner ring road, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. This is the ideas, because basically what I'm going to tell you is Kilmarnock is modelled in Coventry on a smaller scale. And one of the things you'll see at the bottom is he had this inner ring road, and what they wanted was multi-storey car parks round the road. The road was to be elevated, and you would come off the road and go into the top of a multi-storey and then into a shopping centre. That bit didn't quite happen. So this is my last slide in Coventry. That's the ring road, and the picture to the right is the graded junctions. Now, that just means you can go around that ring road without coming to a roundabout as such. The problem is it's quite tight. It's only 2 or 3 mile round it, so you're hitting a junction every 200 or 300 yards. See, if you go to the M8 as you're going through central Glasgow, go at Charing Cross, and it's in canyons, the M8 there. That's what it's like. Dual carriageway on either side, and then it's up in elevated stilts. It's completely different. And Coventry had to demolish 700 houses to build that. And what it's done is it's cut off the city centre. They seemed a good idea. They've actually covered over 100 metres of it to bring the railway station back in. So, finishing at Coventry there. So what I want to do is come back to Kilmarnock, and what we've got is, referring back to that 1896 map, you might say, if I didn't put up a 1960s map, remember, the roads were much the same. So, Glenfinnie Street, King Street, Portland Street, Queen Street, Stirrup Street, and then Clark Street. And you can see the river disappears. That was the flesh market, by the way. The flesh market was the slaughterhouse. It kind of disappeared into the town there. It still does, but not as much. So I'm going to ask you, what happened next? What do you do? What did Percy Johnson Marshall do? Or rather, what did the Borough Council do? You've got that situation. We need to improve it. So what are we going to do here? They cheat and dig here for this. Any ideas what was done? Andy? Thanks, one-way system. Right, spot on, one-way system, what you've got to do, but it wasn't quite that. What they did was they come up with a temporary solution. So we did this. What they did was they made a one-way system. You were up Glenfinnie Street, along West George Street and down Portland Street and King Street and along St Margaret Street. That was a temporary one-way system. It was a sticking plaster. It wasn't going to last long. But you see here, we've got a problem. This bit of the town is cut off, the eastern side of the town. There's just a lot of narrow roads there, only fit for horses and carts. Any traffic would completely clog them. So we're going to get some photos at long last. There is 1972, and the old bank across as a reference point, because I appreciate everybody doesn't know some of the old photos. So there's the old bank at the cross. There's the cars coming down King Street both ways. There you go. Notice there's a big space there, and you can see the viaduct. So good reference point. It looks exactly the same. And the reason that stayed is that was built in 1939, so it was pretty new. They didn't want to take the bank of the cross away. So what happened was, Percy Johnson's Marshall, and in 1968 came up with that document, which I've got a photograph there, called this Town Centre Plan. It's a bit like what Claire's saying. That's like the equivalent of what you might have soon, a strategic plan. That was their strategic plan. This is how they were going to sort the town centre. So that's where we're going. From there, this 1968 document is why the town kind of looks like what it is today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going back to these key roads. So again, it's, as I say, it's a kind of jigsaw I'm putting together here. So there's Dumfries Street. Dumfries Street's pretty good. Dumfries Street's 4 lanes. It's 2 at the moment, but if you take the parking bays out, it's 4 lanes. So Dumfries Street's great. Victorian's nice straight road. And you've got that wee bit of Green Street. There's the agricultural halls. That's the Palace Theatre. It was a farmer's market way back in the day. You're going over the river there, and there's Stirrup Street. Now I've wiped out these bits up here and in here. And that is the only bits that the Percy Johnson Marshall Plan was going to keep. Okay, so this is here we're going. This is the idea. So with my purple pen, I've started going with loads of field tips and share it on this. So then you've got the river, Dumfries Street. So what we're going to do is go right across along the viaduct and down a new bit of Green Street and completely build a new road. Then at the bit of Green Street and Stirrup Street, you can see my purple pen coming down the side. We're going to widen it because it was far too narrow. And that's what you've got to do. That bit actually exists today. You're going to come down here. That's the old Tesco's. There's Phil Street where you go down, but you were actually going to go down a wee bit further and go across in a straight line and cut through the northern bit of the Howard Park and up Dundonald Road. See where Beechwood Nursery is at the top of Howard Park? That's there. So all these nice villas in Dundonald Road were going to disappear. So you're basically you were having an express road around the town. It wasn't called a one-way system. I don't know how that name came about. They call it the distributor road. Do you see the links with Coventry here? It's the same idea, a ring road, but it's on a smaller scale because we're 7 times smaller. We can't afford to have canyons. We can't afford to put it up in stilts. We don't have the room for graded junctions. But it's the same idea. When you look through the book, it's all born out of Coventry. Here's some statistics. Populations. So the problem is, Kilmarnock was meant to be much bigger than it is today. We're sitting about 46,000. We were aiming for about 70, if no more, thousand. Things in the town have been built too big because of that. The bus station's too big. The roads maybe too big. It's because of that. And at the very end, I'm going to bring Irvine into it because Irvine's got a factor too. So, as I said, the big thing was the roads, parking. So, town centre parking. In 1971, we had 642 parking spaces in the town. This is quite incredible. They did all these traffic surveys that ARA would do if you were changing roads today. And they projected they would need 4,200 parking spaces. That's a massive jump. If you look at these figures, what we've got today, I think when I checked with ARA, we're just over 1,000. That includes what's in the multi-storey, which we can't use. So we're 4 times less. So the two questions here. Where did these 600 odd cars park? Where did they park in the town? They just were in scattered car parks, basically just bits that appeared, gap sites, and you're going to see some of them in photos. There was no strategy up to then there wasn't really any town centre plan, so it was just piecemeal, gap sites, dump your car here, parking narrow roads, and then you can't get up them because there's cars jamming them, okay? And we'll see that as we go through it. So that's really important. It's quite incredible. So the next question is, what do you do to fit in 4,200 cars? How do you fit them into the towns? This is a town centre. Where do you put them? Build multi-stories, plural, no one, like we've got the new. We will build 9. Aye. We'll build, and that's quite incredible. So there's a map of the town centre. So the green dots are multi-stories, and I'll show you in a minute. The yellow lines now are pedestrian streets. So that's basically that Titchfield Street, King Street, Portland Street, pedestrianised, Phil Street, Old Tesco pedestrianised, and there's St Margaret Street. That was to pedestrianise something. Was to happen round about this church here. That's the St Margaret's, but I'll come to that. So here's a multi-storey car parks. Right, the actual present one is in a different place for plan. So working through all the figures, Foregate North car park was to be the first one. Then one joined it. See the third one, see where ours just built the surface car park, see where the Salvation Army is. There was to be one there, and they actually started a demolition for it. One at the old Tesco car park, I would call it, pound stretchers, then one behind the kilt shop, you know, just where the pet shop was as well. That's as you just go into Armour Street further down. And then there was to be 2 joined at Beechwood Nursery at Dundonald Road. Then in roughly where the House of Chow is, there was to be one there. And this is the one that throws me, one at Fanny Gaslight. Fanny Gaslight was planned to go, and that was to be a massive multi-storey. And the top deck was to have an overbridge that reached up and joined to platform 1 of the railway station. So if you're at the top of the railway station and look over at Fanny Gaslight, you could have walked across the walkway. So again, what I'm doing is, same map, this time I'm putting on, as well as the multi-storey car parks, you can see the maps of 2 there in Dundonald Road. That's the one at Nelson Street, Starrett Street, blah, blah, blah. What are the yellow dots I put on there? Any idea? Open to everybody. What's the yellow dots? It's underpasses. In the 1960s, traffic lights were no-no. You go to East Kilbride, you go to Cumbernauld, Milton Keynes, you don't have traffic lights. Are very few. The 60s planners didn't want traffic lights. They wanted the traffic flowing around the town. They're all underpasses, which is quite incredible. So that's underpass today. There's the Palace Theatre. That's the only one that was built. Well, I'm not quite right. See up here at the viaduct, they built another one there. It's still there. If you see Mason and Murphy's, when you come along the viaduct, there's a kind of lot of bushes. That behind these bushes, there's a wall, and the underpass goes under there. But it's filled in. All these other ones didn't exist. Greenham and Jim Finney Street. So, you know, you've got pedestrian crossings in Jim Finney Street. They weren't going to be there. It was going to be underpasses. I've got a diagram of one that comes up later on just to prove I'm not making it up there. And that one there is where the kind of present bus station comes out. So quite incredible. You're going to have all these underpasses. Underpasses, completely out of vogue nowadays. Traffic lights are back. And you notice in the list influences, I never mentioned traffic lights because they didn't want to have traffic lights. Okay, the 2 orange dots are overpasses. That was the one at Fanny Gaslight car park going to the railway station, and that's the one at the Starrett Street multi-storey to the King Street shopping mall. And you might say, King Street shopping mall, what are you talking about to come? So, that there is a master plan. And I'm not going to get too caught up in it because I've actually photocopied it and you can take it away with you because you probably spend hours going, what's that? So I'll point out key things here. This is what the town was to look at. So I'm here, let me think. Palace Theatre, you got that, yeah? So, yeah. There's the Palace Theatre Tower there. Right, so you come down here, Starrett Street multi-storey overbridge, 4-lane one-way system, viaduct here, that's your 2 multi-stories. The bus station was actually to be further in. Flat roof, King Street Mall. Now, this is interesting, but this is a road going over Tipsfield Street. That's the ABC Cinema, just in front of it. That's the northern end of the Howard Park, 2 multi-stories. Dundonald Road and Glenfinnie Street create one straight road, and then it hugs the viaduct. That's St Margaret's Church. Got that? So that'll come up later. St Margaret's Church is completely surrounded by concrete buildings. So what I'm going to do is tell you what was in these planning documents. I think in the 60s, as I say, in the 70s was about traffic. They wanted the cars basically to go around in this circle. And one of the quotes and one of the plans is, and it comes from America, obviously, with the term automobiles, we don't want cars in shopping streets. Basically, a car doesn't go into a shop, a person goes into a shop. You go around the one-way system, get your car into a multi-story, park it and walk, do your shopping, come back. So that's why we wanted King Street to be pedestrianised. Cars are clogging it up. It's affecting business. Keep cars away. That was the theory. We've kind of went possibly back. Pedestrianised streets. You look at Prestwick. Prestwick's a good model. Maybe it doesn't work. So, but these are things we can talk about later on. Northeast of the cross. So that's kind of where the multi-story is, if you want to say that. Right, that was a real problem in Kilmarnock. Slums. It was slums, gap sites, piecemeal remains. These green lines I had earlier on, narrow, disconnected roads, that area, if the truth be told, was a mess. It had to be redeveloped. And that's sometimes, people have a wee moan about what's happened. I kind of get we had to do something, the town, it wasn't all this kind of beautiful old town. It was in bits, but there were some areas a complete mess. Duke Street and Waterloo Street. Now, if you ask MD, maybe 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s age, what do they remember about Kilmarnock? They'll always tell you Waterloo Street and Duke Street. These are the two streets that people get a wee bit sore about that were demolished, and probably it was unnecessary. And then there was other arguments. Well, you can see why they've done it, but again, I'll explain more of them. But basically, the planning document said it was inadequate layout and floor space. See, these streets had wee quirky lanes. The shops didn't have straight lines. There's wee curves in the shops, wee kind of back alleys, basements. They didn't like that. They wanted everything to be nice rectangles and squares in the shops, kind of like you see in the Burns Mall now. Functional. So basically they said, we're going to obliterate that. The whole eastern side of King Street was to be wiped out. And so was the western side of King Street, where the white tile building is, etc. But there's a problem. The river's in the road. There simply wasn't enough room for the river. So the fact we've got a river there means we don't have the same development in the other side. So the river kind of saved us. So how did the town go about doing that? So what they started to do is they started to negotiate with building owners, right? How do you fancy selling up and moving? How do you fancy selling up and retiring if you're a wee bit older and they get good money? And what I've got here, these are a few slips where it's actually what owners were given. This was compensation. So people were given compensation to get out of the building. However, not everybody wanted to move. So they had to apply, and some of you that work in this area, CPOs, compulsory purchase orders, often without much notice. And I would probably say the compulsory purchase orders aren't like what you'd have today. It was basically, you get out. If you're not out, the building's coming round about you. And one example was Mason and Murphy, and I'll point out where it was in a wee bit. It's up at the viaduct. That was near Duke Street. They were kind of resisting, didn't really want to move. And then they come in on Monday morning, there was a letter through their door. You've got 6 weeks to get out. If you're out in 6 weeks, all your furniture will be outside the shop and the building's coming down. We are taking that down. And I'll explain later how you manage to get these compulsory purchase orders, because some of you will know CPOs are pretty difficult to do, and there's a lot of negotiation, but no back then. The fate of King Street and Portland Street is sealed. Again, I'll let you read that. This is the kind of view. You're going up and down. This would apply to the High Street in there as well. Argyle Street in Glasgow. traffic going both ways, narrow pavements, shoppers, office workers above, rush hour, everybody's piling out. You've got all these cars. The cars were very polluting back then, so you've just got a muddle of noise, fumes, conflicting uses. And what the planners, they were saying back then was shopping streets kind of just grew organically, you know, for the 1900s. There was no plans. They just kind of grew. Bits were added on. And, you know, things weren't great. So that it was just unplanned change. We'll build this here, we'll build that. This office will open. They wanted rigid planning as such. So what we did, they were going to do it in 3 phases. So phase 1, this is a phase that kind of happened. So early 70s, we're going to widen Green Street and Stirling Street to 4 lane. That's happened. You see it today. It's kind of been narrowed a wee bit. We're going to build multi-storey A, B and C. So that's the 2 up at the Foregate and the Stirling Street multi, and also the one down where Pound Stretcher is. The bus station, it's happened. A hotel. Wait a minute. The only hotel I see in the town is a Park Hotel, no town centre hotel. And a cinema, and also the King Street precinct. Phase 2, further on, just what Elaine mentioned, a bit through the Howard Park, other multis, and something called the St Margaret Civic Precinct, which is of interest to us all. Phase 3, finish the road up at West George Street. So West George Street, where Sinfarani is, where Fanny Gaslight is, WG13, you kind of get down and there's a bend at the end. That bend was to be wiped out. The buildings were to be cleared. So at the top of Glenfinnie Street, the road was to hug the viaduct all the way along. But that bit never got done, which we'll come to. So a kind of timeline. So 1968, development plan. 71, we'll do phase 1. And what we did is we created a CDA, a comprehensive development area. I've got a slide explaining what that is. Now, it was bounded. It's an area where you can carry out this work. So to the north, Union Street, that's the other side of the viaduct. Phil Street, I've mentioned that as where the old Tesco was. You all know Portland Street, King Street. That was to the west, and Stirling Street to the east. So that area's in there. Compensation for those who agreed to sell, including Dick Brothers Garage. Remember I mentioned earlier on. So 1972, we start building the Foregate, which is there today. 73, we opened the bypass. That did help the traffic problem. So if you're going from here to Glasgow or whatever, you don't have to go through the town. I remember my dad told me in the late 50s, see Kilmarnock Fair Friday, early July, the traffic would sit in Kilmarnock for hours, no moving, because folk were going down from Glasgow at their holidays to the coast, and traffic was just clogged. You could sit for hours in King Street. So the bypass, the eastern bypass opening helped, but it wasn't enough. We still had to focus on the inner core. 1974, the Foregate's open. Now, the Foregate's quite interesting because sometimes people wonder who owns it. The Foregate is all privately owned. And the reason it's privately owned is because the traders who were in Duke Street and Waterloo Street, the Foregate was built as a replacement. So you take your shop and you move from Duke Street or Waterloo Street to the Foregate. But no everybody did, because again, maybe if the shop owners, the pub owners were a wee bit older, that compensation money or CPO money, pretty good money they were getting. It's enough to retire. So what happened is a lot of shops and pubs just closed. We lost a lot because of this. They didn't move, but some did move. And again, I'm not sure if it's still in the Foregate. See if you got the Foregate, you know where the wee post office is? There's a post office there, you get the fish shop and you just go up a bit. See the sign on it, it says Waterloo Street Post Office. And that's still known as the Waterloo Street Post Office, and that's the reason they kept the title. So there's all these wee quirky things out there you can still see. 75, the multi-storey, the present one opened. 76, Kilmarnock Centre, that's what it was called at the time. The Burns Precinct opened. Ravenseth with the developer, I'll talk more about that. And then by 1980, the last section was built. That's, you know, W.H. Smith and Downwards, and it kind of stops at Boots. Boots wasn't part of it. Interestingly, phase 2 and phase 3 never materialised for certain reasons, which we can talk about. Now, we've had the Mothercare site cleared. I need to emphasise the Mothercare site isn't in the CDA. The Mothercare site was built in the 60s. The Mothercare site was before this. So the Mothercare site has got nothing to do with it. That was there first. Okay. So it's kind of, how did they put this together? Well, I've been into kind of local history. It's always interested me, and, you know, how did the town come about? Doing some Google searches, and I learned all his files are up in Edinburgh, up at Edinburgh University. And the reason is he based his practice in Edinburgh, round about Duddingston Village, which is near Arthur Seat. That's where he was based. And he worked on his projects out of there. He actually built much at Edinburgh Uni. If you go up to Edinburgh Uni, it's no like maybe Glasgow, old-fashioned. It's all very concrete. And some of it looks like Kilmarnock. There's actually a library bit at Edinburgh Uni. It looks like the inside of the old Clydesdale Bank. I can see the influences with the high vaulted wooden roofs, which I really like. But anyway, Stuart Wilson, Penny went to Grange Academy. Stuart was a teacher there with me. He's the president of the history group. And we went up to Edinburgh Uni 6 times and booked into the library. And they brought out these boxes and boxes of documents. And it's basically the original plans, and you're going to see some of them. That's the original plans for the town, and there was just hundreds of them. So we were there for 6 days, and what I did was really, we opened them up, quick glance, I really digitised them. So all you were doing was camera, photo, put next one, camera, photo. And really, the studying came when I got back home. It's quite incredible. And I asked the library staff, how did they end up there, and has anybody else seen them? So nobody else has ever opened them. And the reason they're in Edinburgh and not in Kilmarnock is Percy Johnson Marshall died in 93. His widow cleared out his office in 99, sold a house, blah, blah, and said, right, you worked at Edinburgh Uni. So she just basically gave all her stuff to Edinburgh University, which is really, really good, because that could easily have ended up in a skip. See the amount of stuff, historical stuff, it ends up in skips and buildings are cleared, you know, and it probably has happened here. So it was good, but you were coming out after 2 hours, your head was exploding with just all these maps and diagrams. So it says in the tune, so I'm just tickling through it now. Round the tunes of races, you all know. So I just thought that's the idea. But what we are going to do is go round the Distributor Road. And you might kind of laugh at that. Actually, I remember maybe in the 90s, you kind of had the boy racers who used to park up at Foregate North Car Park, and they would do that. They would kind of race around the town, because see the bit where London Road meets the one-way system, there wasn't the traffic lights to 2004, so they'd be belting down that bit for the viaduct to the old Tesco, probably doing 40, 50 mile an hour. So the lights at London Road stopped all that, which was needed. I think that was one of the reasons we were put in. So we will go around the Distributor Road. What the map there is, that is the old town. And what they've done is they've superimposed the road. So you can see it, Coventry, Ring Road, same idea. And that was what we wanted. This, remember, this isn't what happened. This is what we wanted. So again, I don't want to get caught up too much in the detail. This is me starting to look at the drawings that are in Edinburgh. Viaduct. There's the top of Gymkhana Street. There's the railway station banking. There's the last car park, the overbridge there. But notice the road's pretty straight, so you don't have that bend at the end of West George Street. Along the viaduct, Foregate North Car Park, one multi-storey. And then there's another multi-storey there. There's Green Street coming down. Dick Brothers Garage. Dick Brothers Garage is where the present bus station is. The bus station wasn't going to be there. That was a last minute change. The bus station was going to be further in. That's the Foregate shops there. The bus station was going to be where the present multi is. So things get moved a wee bit, but I don't want you to get too tied up in this detail. Forget about all the stuff in the middle at the moment. We've got this straight road running along the viaduct. This was this new section. There's a photograph Can anybody tell me where it is? There's a wee clue in the picture, maybe a big clue, and can you maybe tell me when it's taken? Yep, it's Waterloo Street. You're standing at the front entrance to the multi-storey. Right, that's pretty incredible. And you're looking up to the viaduct. You know, if you go on the bus to Glasgow, and it goes under the viaduct, that arch there, it's where the bus goes under today. So see this? That is Foregate North Car Park. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? That's Foregate North Car Park. This was taken in the late 1800s. So, some social context. Hobbles, bare feet, poor dress, beer barrels, bare individual shops, lanes. So who were these people? A lot of these people were immigrants from Ireland who were brought over to build the viaduct. Yeah, they were brought over to build Kilmarnock Viaduct. It's well known that one of the Irish immigrants fell to his death at the K Park section building the viaduct. The stone for the viaduct came from the K Park. See down the bottom of the K Park, call that the bowl. Just that's been cut out by ice in the Ice Age. They get the sandstone for that and they built up the viaduct. So this was a real problem area, Kilmarnock. See in the photograph, it looks really nice, but it was immersed in poverty, real poverty. And if you want a comparison with Glasgow, this is the Gorbals in Glasgow. Every town and city had these areas. As I say, it looks really nice, but massive problems. And I'm just going to read them out. It was actually Waterloo Street, as Elaine correctly says. So it went from the viaduct to the multi-storey, and from the multi-storey it cut through it and ended up at a cross. More to come on that later. So I'm going to read a wee bit out of this, just about 4th Street. This is just some historical context. 4th Street, it had wool stores, carpet factories, wool manufacturing and water-powered machinery, because it's near the river. 2 tan yards and tanning pits. So there was a lot of industry up there. People lived beside the factories and the houses. There were approximately 140 to 160 slum dwellings in a very decayed state, been 200 years old or more. 31 shops and 6 pubs. Remember, no supermarkets, you had your individual shops. You had 6 grocers and 2 licensed grocers, because you just stepped out the door and got your messages there. It was pretty straightforward. Now, in 1918, we were seeing high incidences of scarlet fever, enteric fever, and tuberculosis. It was rife because these houses didn't have running water. The sewage just went onto the street. So the living conditions were terrible. Kilmarnock was a major TB black spot. The medicine was cheap. It was alcohol. The beer, 5 shillings a pint. So people took alcohol as their medicine. Now, in this area, as I say, there was a high proportion of Irish immigrants or Irish labourers. There was a street off that called East George Street, where the Clydesdale Bank is. And the workers would go up to the railway station. It was called Paddy's Brea. It was its wee kind of nickname, because just the Irish workers would go there and come back from their work. Now, you've got these houses there. They look kind of pretty nice outside. They were just jam-packed in them. Further down the Foregate, there's a local historian who was telling me some of the stories recently. There's one particular house. In fact, there's one house had 70 people housed in it, which is quite incredible. And between the Clydesdale Bank, they still call it the old name Virgin Bank, I guess. And you know what Kev's Cards is? If you can draw a line down there, roughly 700 people lived there. It was just absolute mass of people. So in one of the houses, there was 70 people. And that was called a model lodging house. And a model lodging house was for single men. Single men brought over from Ireland, and they put them all in there, and they were more or less just sleeping kind of side by side as such. Poor kitchen facilities. It was terrible. And what ended up was these men brought their differences with them, as the wallop was so cheap. Wallop's a colloquial word for beer, and there was never any difficulty getting a good fight going. There was a lot of crime in the area, a lot of fighting, a lot of alcoholism. And I'm going to send you a wee extract. I'll get Claire, because Claire's got all your names. There's a wee extract of some of the incidences that happened in that area. Now, we got to about the 1920s and the Borough Council realised we can't go on like that. The First World War's finished. We need to improve the living conditions. So the Borough Council purchased tin huts from the Scythe, the dockyards, and they built them at Town Home. Town Homes were Bonnet and Thistle Place. It's just, you know, if you're not from Kilmarnock, it's near the K Park, just beyond it. Town Home, they put up these tin houses, and it was nicknamed Tin Town. And the people who lived in 4th Street area, this area north of the Stony Cross, they were displaced, they were moved out to Town Home. These tin houses didn't last too long, and then they built better quality houses. And you see the houses you see on the other side of London Road at Pearson Park, it was the same of them, but they got into a mess too. And in the 1970s, the whole of Town Home was cleared. Other areas were built as well. Long Park was built. Long Park was the Garden City principle, and it was meant to have tree-lined streets and shops. They didn't materialise in the church. Also, Comores Road, Western Road, these were built in the 1930s. These were all replacement houses for these people in this bit of the town. Now, why did 4th Street become so crammed, this area northeast? Well, again, everybody burned fires in these days. And I remember learning geography back at school. Geography teacher said to me, the poorer areas of any town or city are always to the east or the northeast. And the reason is everybody's burning fires. Our wind comes from the west or southwest. So all the people living in the west or southwest of town, the wind blows the smoke away from them and it blows it over the poorer people in the east and northeast. And that's what happened here. There was areas of wealth in Kilmarnock. All the shop owners and business owners and merchants, they built houses in London Road. All the houses in London Road up to Pearson Park were owned by the shopkeepers and merchants, and it spilled onto Dundonald Road and Bank Street. But what I really want to emphasise is this area northeast of the cross. So presently, Kev's Cards all the way to the viaduct had this big social problem. Really did. So I'm going to show you the same photo in 1970, and you're going to get a wee bit of a shock here, but it's going to tell you why things changed. So this is a street scene. Here we are in 1970. I'll just flick back a wee minute. There you go. And there we go. If somebody says it's been a big mistake what happened in Kilmarnock in the 1970s, it's dystopia, I would tend to agree with them before I did the research, but now you might go, well, if you look at this photo, something had to change. What happened was some of the buildings were falling down. Some of the buildings literally fell down. There was no planning in these days, and what folk were doing with these houses with 60, 70 people in them, they were illegally building bits into the back of them, knocking bits down, building separate wee lanes. One was called Bond Lane. It was just a tangled mess. Maybe a wee bit like a favela you'd see in South America. There was just no planning restrictions. So people were moving out and they started to demolish bits. And you can see here the foundations of the houses and demolished it. That there is the same bit. That's Waterloo Street under the viaduct. So what happened was, that's what I'm talking about. This is piecemeal remains. And that was where your 640 odd cars parked. Cars were just parking in waste ground. See, for them to all cars for the 70s, you're going to love this now, because there's loads of 70s cars coming up. So you just dumped your car in it. You didn't pay for parking. No parking meters or whatever. You just dumped them in waste ground. But there was no plan. These wee streets were getting clogged up. It was terrible. So something had to be done there. So going back to the Percy Johnson Marshall plans in Edinburgh, this is clearing the rest of these buildings, and along the viaduct we're going to build the distributor road, 4-lane, and you can see here 4 lanes. What they started off is they didn't have computer aided design, they just drew them in paper, so that's just a wee rough sketch. You can see 4-lane, and then they tidied it up a wee bit. And what you have here is 3 or 4 lanes, the viaduct. See the arches again. The arches are empty now. I quite like them that way, and you get the kind of the light in there. But see the arches. they had businesses under them. You get that in Glasgow still a bit, but the businesses were like a rag trade, rag and bone men. Again, it was like these shanty towns. You didn't get planning permission. You just put them up with corrugated iron. You probably didn't pay any rental. And then if you get a chance of a better shop down the 4th Street, then you moved there. So they kind of decided we'll clear out the arches as well. And what we have is, that's multi-storey A. That's the first one, Foregate North car park, you can see it there. And that's, you'll not read that, that's just more or less saying you want to make the height line the same as that box. That's a signal box on top of the viaduct, which is a way, but you'll see a photo in a minute. So there you go. You can see how they're doing their plans. They're actually just out with pencils and drawing with scribbles. What's that there? It's an overhead gantry. If you go into Glasgow, you got overhead gantries. They were going to have overhead gantries. Again, that blocks sightlines. There was actually going to be 3 overhead gantries in Gymfinity Street. When you've got their beautiful buildings, they decided, obviously, cost cutting, not to do that. Next photo will be quite interesting because if you're not for Kilmarnock, you'll definitely get this one. There you go. Multi-storey is just built. So this is 1975, multi-storey, Foregate. What's in here now? Clydesdale Bank. That's the start of Foregate North car park. Big crane. See all these buildings here? This was just a mess of old tenements. Basically, they were not to get demolished for the Clydesdale Bank. There was buildings along here. All these buildings were cleared. Remember I said a lot of buildings were cleared in Coventry? All these buildings here were cleared. That's Mason and Murphy, by the way. It's just the blue paints off it there. So you got the kind of line. The bus is going the wrong way. They didn't make it a one-way system until it's finished. So that was a temporary two-way system till the road was finished. And you see at the far side of the viaduct, all these cars, they're not in a traffic jam. That was just the workers' cars. Well, a bit in there, they just parked it. And also look up at the viaduct, you see the nice signal box. There you go. So that's a multi-storey getting built, and the Foregate. Everything was done in phases. When they did the work, they started at the very top and worked their way down the town. So we're starting up at the Foregate multi. What I've done here is I've taken 2 photographs and kind of joined them together. We're moving further down Green Street. Again, there's a bit of a clue here. So where are we now at Green Street? Emily, get any idea where we are? I know it's pretty hard to believe. That's the Palace Theatre. So if I'm taking this photograph, you know how you come down Green Street, turn to London Road, there's a flower bed. Maybe you don't notice it, but there's a flower bed. That's where you're standing. That there, remember I mentioned Dick Brothers Garage, the first cars, that's Dick Brothers Garage. That's the showroom garage behind. That's Green Street. See where my pen's point, that's the entrance to the present bus station, more or less. It's like another world, isn't it? That's you get into the bus station. This is the revered Duke Street at this end, the London Road end. That's Duke Street. You go down Duke Street. But look how narrow Stirrup Street is. That's why they had to widen the road at Stirrup Street to make the one-way system. It was really narrow. Far end of Duke Street, that's the Palace Bar. So if you were going to a show or going to Grand Hall, remember in for a wee drink at the Palace Bar and cross the road, no underpass, no traffic lights. Look, just nice wee narrow road into the Palace Theatre. There was another pub, the New King or the Sun Inn. Now in this area there was 6 pubs. Every one of them were lost. So there must have been people who took the money and ran when they get CPO'd. And this is the thing, when you look at the social history, as well as the buildings in the road, we lost a lot. We lost a lot of businesses. We lost a lot of traders in Kilmarnock because of this. And I can understand why they're thinking, well, we'll just move on, etc. And there was going to be, you know, 1 or 2 pubs in the new plan, but it was never like the same. This photo here comes from the planning book, the 1968 plan, the strategic plan, if you could call it that back then. So, multi-storey. Sorry, not the multi-storey, the Burner Halls. So the Palace Theatre was to be known as the Borough Halls. This was a kind of precinct area. So remember the term precinct, they wanted it on these separate precincts. So Palace Theatre remained. That was a good condition. You don't knock that again. So that stays. So you're coming down Green Street. Dick Brothers Garage was going to stay. That's the bus station. That's where the Burns Marlow is, but it looks different. That was to be a cinema. No replacement for the ABC, the replacement for another cinema. Talk about that in a minute. And that's the King Street Mall. That's kind of where BHS is. So the road kind of works like that. You can come round. That's you going round to London Road. But there's no underpass there. So I don't know how they were going to do the crossing. It's not quite in the diagram, but you still see the Palace Theatre as such. What actually happened? Well, one of the historians, he actually went around Kilmarnock in the 60s and 70s and took loads of photographs, and we were really glad we got them. This is taken from the multi-story because the multi-story is open, zoom lens, Palace Theatre. That's the start of the Burns Marlow. Okay, everybody get that? London Road comes down. So what's happening here? There's the Salvation Army. See where my laser pen's kind of kicking a bit. There's something that kind of black there that'll be doing it. What's the black thing? Yep, it's the underpass. Because the underpass there isn't an underpass. What they've done is they bought it in, prefabricate it, 3 sections and dropped it down. And then they got all the soil for the development where they're building a mile and just built it up in the other side. So the road was built a bit higher there, and for one reason, so you can have a so-called underpass there, and that's still there today. Now, if you're coming from London Road, how do you get into the town centre? Like you can see folk walking in, and the bulldozers, etc. around about there. No Harris fencing, just wooden boards. You can see it pass through for people to walk. So I don't know if anybody's for the health and safety department, but probably what happened then, you never get walked through building sites. There is the Stirling Street Bridge. The Stirling Street Bridge is a wee bit different today. You can see it's quite narrow. They had to close the whole road to do that. Salvation Army there. There you go. Centre stage still there. Kilmarnock Academy. So it's 10 in the winter because you can see the boilers are in there. And that's the mall start to get. Aye, that was old fire station. See, as you go into the service area in the Palace Theatre, that was the kind of local fire station. So you can see there they're starting to, that whole area was transformed. They're starting to build the road up so the traffic could bypass. You wanted it to bypass that was town. But the problem is, you're disconnecting the Palace Theatre for the town centre. But they wanted precincts. The Palace Theatre was its own precinct. That was a cultural precinct. Now, if you're interested in local history, Facebook, Pictures Old Kilmarnock's a great site to go into, and the comments are pretty sensible. That anything silly is filtered out. So I actually got that offer there. And what we've done is, you're standing at Kilmarnock Cross, and that's where the statue is at present. You're looking into the Burns Mall, but Duke Street was a line up to the Palace Theatre. And what somebody's done is they've superimposed the road, and it just shows basically Stirling Street cuts right through Duke Street, and the road is about 5 or 6 foot higher, and that just shows you how part of the Palace Theatre is blocked off because the road's elevated. But they've done it so the traffic would flow quickly along there to get to the various multi-stories. Okay, so again, if you look at it, you can see the Clydesdale Bank there. So Clydesdale Bank moved to where Virgin is just now, bigger site, and the newsagents in the left-hand side of Duke Street, that was John Menzies. And before it, it was a pet shop. Pet shop is in the foreground, Andrew Thompson, who was in my class at school. He had a pet shop. So there you go. But a lot of these businesses in Duke Street. Now, Duke Street demolition was massively controversial one, maybe as today, back then. But again, I get chatting to somebody one night who had a business in Duke Street, just on the Facebook page, and she said, everybody loved Duke Street, it was beautiful, but there was problems as well, big problems. See the upper floors it was shops on the lower floors, but floor 1 and 2, it had been residential, but people weren't really living there. And again, it was just empty. They were full of dampness. There was no running water. There was no heating. So a lot of these buildings were in a decrepit state. Blonde sandstone, I heard some of the sandstone was quite crumbly as well. So something had to be done. But what you would probably do nowadays, you would keep this bit of Duke Street and you would build your mall behind it. Facade retention, a bit like, in the Opera House, the first edition. They're both examples of modern facade retention. You can do that there. Come to that side in a wee minute. Yeah. Right. Moving back on to Percy, Johnson and Marshall's kind of planning map. Borough Halls. Borough Halls is a Palace Theatre. There's the river. That is the grass bank on the other side where Burlington Berties and the Labour Club was. That's an Annica's big plan for the cultural quarter. That will look so much better. Across the road, variety stores. A variety store is basically supermarkets, Cow Street Mall, but what I really want to get is centre stage, Old Kilmarnock Academy. Kilmarnock Academy steps there and there. There's your third multi-storey. And there's an overbridge into the King Street Mall. Now, again, very controversial. Duke Street, and the other street I mentioned was Waterloo Street. So where's Waterloo Street? It's obviously around about that area. I can end to pinpoint where Waterloo Street was. Waterloo Street, like Duke Street, was deemed obsolete and get wiped out of existence. That's it there. So where is it? Where would I be standing, or where would you be standing if you're looking at that?
To the back is BHS.
Yep. Right. So Dougie's going it. You're standing at the back of BHS. You've got the new bridge at Starlock Street. You're standing there, and next time you're doing that, you just look, and all you're doing is looking into a red brick wall at BHS. It's horrible. That's the worst bit. That was Waterloo Street. Waterloo Street was a beautiful wee street. I don't remember it. What you had in Waterloo Street, it ran to the cross and met Duke Street. You had the Tam O'Shanter pub. Tam O'Shanter pub was a very old pub, because see, just off of the Tam O'Shanter pub, the Tam O'Shanter was here. That one. And just off of there, there's a narrow lane called the Close Inn. And the Close Inn, you could only get a horse and a person up there. And it went up and then took a dog leg and ended up at a cross. But see up that wee lane, there was an inn called the Star Close Inn, and that's where Robert Burns's first book of poems were published. By John Wilson. And the statue across, there's two folk on it, John Wilson and Robert Burns. So we've got John Wilson, who published Burns' first book of poets. And what we did was, quite incredibly, we demolished all these buildings round about there. That probably should have been preserved, and then you could have had a museum or whatever there today. So that there is a really historic area. In the top photograph, that there is the Flesh Market Bridge, and behind there, that's the Lake Kirk. Everybody happy with that? Yeah. So it's just popping out, and see next to it is another tower. That was the town hall. The town hall sits where New Look is, and it had a wee spire on it. That was actually the only building with a spire that was demolished, because remember I mentioned the Molist spires? They actually didn't want to lose spires in churches, but that was the only one. The town hall was demolished. Again, I'll explain why in advance. So, if you look in the next photo, that photo was probably taken late 1800s. It's the same street, Flesh Market Bridge there, but what we've done is we've covered it because we've got a parking problem. In 1929, they started to cover the river there. So they put that cover over so we could park cars. So that's what I call these piecemeal car parks. And that was there until they demolished it. because that car park became insufficient, and bits of Waterloo Street were getting demolished kind of piecemeal. So again, it was starting to turn into a wee bit of a mess. And on that bridge, there was actually a date stone, and it was 1832. There was a huge flood there. One day, a big storm in the Fenwick Moor, all the water came down the Fenwick Moor into the Kilmarnock water, and it backed up, and it basically flooded there and right into the cross. So, you know, if you go up to Perth or whatever, you've got all these markers where there was floods. And I was told the date stone is actually in the Palace Theatre. I had a wee rake about, and I haven't found it yet, which I would like to find, and we could maybe reinstate it. Car Park C. The Stirrup Street multi-storey. So Anna have just opened a car park at Stirrup Street where the Conservative Club was. It looks good. It's a lot tidier than what it was, but it's nothing compared to what was planned. Here's the first sketch of it. Now, as Barry will know, that site's quite tight for the surface car park, so it's going to be quite tight for the multi as well. So what they did, because you've got the Academy Hill, you've got your 5 stack of cars there, and then other bits there and there. But this is a 4-lane road. The multi-storey was going to be built over the road. So in the inner 2 lanes, cars could go through, and then in the outer 2 lanes, high-sided vehicles. So going by the Palace Theatre, the road was going to have to filter you into lanes to go through this multi-storey. And you can see at the far end where it says section. That's a walkway bridge over to the King Street shopping mall where W.H. Smith is. Remember I told you about walkways? So the idea was you could get parked your car, out your car walked, and you were into the shops. The car is left behind. That wasn't the idea. See if you're wondering what these numbers are, 42.8, blah, blah, blah. That's the height above sea level. We're into all these kind of details. There you go. All boring stuff. Right, you'll love this photo. So this, again, is taken probably from a multi-storey as the Burns Mall is getting built. Loads of interesting things here to talk about. It's the only one that exists in that side of Stirrup Street today. There's buildings getting demolished for Car Park C. So Car Park C was starting in the planning. They just didn't build it, but they started the demolition. And see this wee bit of the river here, it's quite interesting. That'll probably be in the Palace Theatre plan because you're going to get around the bank here. See here, there's a wee bit of subsidence here, and that's because these buildings have basements. And if you look over the bridge, you can actually see them bricked up. Stirrup Street, you can see is narrow. That's them starting to widen it. That concrete bit here is the road starting to be raised up. See as you come out the Burns Mall, you head to the underpass, you can see it today. It's clad, but that's it getting built. These are all concrete pillars. That's the mill getting built. Mill built the Hastings McFarlane, same companies built the multi-storey. There's a river. The river's all open there. There's Waterloo Street, these nice old buildings. Waterloo Street's wiped out existence. All the work is vans, porter cabins, and then some of the other buildings like Lauders Emporium further down King Street, which were to go. That's where the road goes further down the old Tesco. That's the one-way road there. That's another piece of the old surface car park. If you know that bit, there's a kind of, what was it, where the Academy Step comes down, there's Clark Street there. Clark Street's further over. That was the road to the Newton. And you probably can't see, but see up the very top corner when I'm pointing the laser. That's the milk bottles or the cooling towers down at Rickerton. Kilmarnock had a power station down there and 2 massive cooling towers you get at coal fire stations. They come down in the mid-70s. So you can see a massive crane. That bit of concrete there, that's the back of BHS starting. The bridge there get demolished and the present bridge decks there. The reason the old bridge had to get demolished was it was only wide enough for 2 lanes we needed 4. If you were to ask probably MD, age 50 and over, do they prefer what they've got today or what they had in the past? I don't think you'd find one person who prefers what you've got today. But they forget, you know what it's like? You maybe think back 10 years, you think about all the good things, you tend to forget about the bad things. Folk don't forget about 4th Street and the gap sites and the horrible car parks are gap, where folk are just dumping cars. That's the problem. Everybody wanted a car, every family wanted one, and you're telling them there's not going to be congestion in the town centre. We're going to have this road where all the cars move. You'll be able to park in a multi-storey, go into a shopping centre. You can see. And I remember it was getting built. I was 5 or 6, and it did look quite exciting. All these big cranes and, the buildings going up. It really was exciting. So what I'll do is I'm moving further down the one-way system. Right, pound stretchers. The old Tesco's is about here. They were to be multi-stories. So you come down here. I think it's Armour's Beds or something, Armour Street, and then the road goes right round, and it goes up in stilts over Titchfield Street. Now that's the old ABC cinema, and there it's going through the northern bit of Howard Park. That's Beechwood Nursery, 2 multi-stories, and then the Civic Precinct. And I should mention as well, I might forget the one thing. See the cinema at the Cross? That wasn't a replacement for the ABC. That was a replacement for the Plaza. Marks and Spencer's got built on top of it. And see if you go in the back door of the Marks and Spencer's, you notice there's a wee kind of road that just hits a wall. Have a wee look. See it, Olivia's. There's a wee road that just runs into the wall. That was Mill Lane. That was a wee into the second cinema in Kilmarnock at the time. So that is the road running through the northern bit of the Howard Park. This never happened. And then all these houses from Beechwood, Nursery up to the courthouse, they were to be demolished. Some fine villas there. Again, this photo, there's some clues. There's one building still in it. It's the back of River Island. There's a sign River Island on it. That's the back of River Island. That's you at the bottom. That's you at the bottom of the Academy steps. There's the Marks and Spencer's car park. The Marks and Spencer's is there. That is the old Tesco's car park. That was the Elam Hall. That was there for quite a while. That's them starting to demolish, they were in a hell of a mess. Underneath there was the Queen Street Cafe. Queen Street Cafe, along with the Coffee Club and the Ritz and Bank Street, they were the cool places to be seen if you were maybe 5th and 6th year at school. So the pupils who were in 5th and 6th year come out Kilmarnock Academy, down the Academy steps and into the Queen Street Cafe at the time. So all good stuff. That was that getting cleared. You can see the roads in place, cleared to build these surface car parks. Titchfield Street. That there's the ABC. So you're further down. That'll be the Galleon now. That's the road going over Titchfield Street. So it goes over Titchfield Street. Titchfield Street, you can drive up to these ballers, and then it's pedestrianised all the way up by Mothercare, all the way up. Oh, got a wee tower block there. And the reason that tower block was to be built was when you built Mothercare earlier, there was a big church there, the King Street Church. That was one of the few churches that were lost. They wanted that to kind of match the height line of the King Street Church. So you can see that there. You can see a British Rail lorry, 4-lane road going over, and that was to take you past to the Howard Park. Remember I mentioned what was the influences of Percy Johnson Marshall, and one of the things was surprisingly spires. He still wanted church spires to dominate the skyline. And every of these archive images I found up in Edinburgh, at the bottom corner, you've got the stamp. So it's stamped Percy Johnson Marshall and the date there. And what that's saying is they're going to measure the height of all the tall buildings. So if you actually need to know the height at any of these tall churches and buildings in Kilmarnock, I've got them there. But the key here is church spires still had to dominate the skyline. That's why Kilmarnock doesn't have any high flats. The highest flats in Kilmarnock are New Farm, 5-storey high. Here, you had 3, they're having problems getting one of them down. Irvin's got 5. Saltcoats, I think, has got 2. Kilmarnock decided not to go for high rise. They wanted to keep low rise, 5-storey at the most, which is quite interesting. And that goes back to the Percy Johnson Marshall influence in the architects at that time. It was all low rise. Where are we now? Any idea? Church, where's the church? Sorry? Yeah, well done, St Margaret's Church. Completely changed. St Margaret's Church was to stay. Remember I mentioned about London St Paul's precinct? St Paul's Cathedral was lucky to survive the war. A bomb fell on top of it, but there was people there who were trying to protect the cathedral, and they got rid of the bomb and defused it. But see all around about St Paul's in London, it got wiped out, so it's a blank canvas, and there's a lot of 60s, 70s buildings round about St Paul's Cathedral. So they had the same idea. Percy Johnson Marshall had that. Coventry, and Coventry's kept the churches, but you build all these concrete buildings around them. So you were going to create the civic precinct. So what you have here is police station, which is kind of there. Remember, no traffic because you've been through the Howard Park, so this is to be pedestrianised. That's the Borough Council headquarters. So if that went ahead, you would be in here, you'd be here, you'd be in that room there. That was to be the chambers, and that was.
There you
go. That's the provost car. So, honestly, that's a Rolls Royce. That would be the provost car. But you can see there, it's just a plaza. You know what that reminds me of a wee bit? It's a bit like Irvine. You know, you go down the Rivergate at Irvine, you've got a Trinity Church. Irvine's kind of turned out like that, and I bet you Coventry's a bit like that too. Again, you might think some of these drawings were fanciful. They weren't. The council must have spent thousands, tens of thousands in today's money, because there's literally thousands of drawings up there. And this is one of Jim Finney Street, just very quickly. That building and that building's the Royal Bank of Scotland, and that's in Bank Place. So you have two options. Do you go down and have a wee dog leg, or do you make it straight down? That there is Barluca, or was Barluca, I know it's changed now. So Barluca, that's the back of the old Frasers. What's key about this is we're going to build another bridge over the river at Sandbed to link with King Street. So that was in the plans as well. So you were going to wipe out the bottom end of Jim Finney Street up to here. The rest of Jim Finney Street from Bank Place upwards on both sides would remain, along with round about the Lake Cut. That was the only bits that were going to survive. And remember I said underpasses. This is Bank Place. That's a coffee place. So Bank Place is pedestrianised. There's your underpass. There's the Duke, same building. There's above Adventure. Just the Royal Bank looks different. So no pedestrian lights. There's one underpass. Just proves I'm not making all these things up. It did. It was in the plans. Right. So I've mentioned CDAs earlier. A wee bit of theory here. What's a CDA? It was to allow councils to compulsory purchase, to replan, and it was because urban blight, like I've mentioned, and also war damage. So it came about in 1947. How do you get a CDA? The Secretary of State of Scotland, remember, no devolution then, they approved it. So Kilmarnock got approved. You know what that meant? You get money thrown at you, because you might be thinking, where's all the money come from? The money get thrown at you. So here's a master plan for the CDA. Remember I told you the bound of it? Elm Street, King Street, Portland Street, and Stirrup Street. The shading is just different timelines. All these were to be different phases. Red was to be phase 1. Again, there's a Palace Theatre. Duke Street, there's a wee map. Waterloo Street. So this is on the Burns Mall. That's the bus station. Remember, the new road doesn't exist. Why I put that one in is everything in red there is owned by the Borough Council. Red shading is about to be owned, and everything in blue isn't owned. They were negotiating with the owners of the blue shading, and if they didn't sell up, they were CPO'd. And yeah, Hall Street. That was to be Foregate. This is why the council owned the land at the Burns Mall and the Foregate. The buildings in the Foregate are privately owned, but the council own the land. And the reason they own the land is because of that map, because the council bought up all the land. And it's the same with the Burns Mall. They bought up all the land for Duke Street, Waterloo Street to build the Burns Mall. The council owned the mall. New River Retail own it now, but the council still own the land. And that is the reason why we have got all that land there, even though there might be private ownership above it. Again, listed buildings. I think Kilmarnock, Karen might correct me, maybe 50 or so listed buildings. Back then, listing wasn't as big, so there wasn't as much protection. When the CDA, you had the old High, still there. The Town Hall, now the Town Hall was a beautiful building, but again, I got into rack and ruin, and it was demolished a wee bit ahead of the rest in 12 and 14 Waterloo Street. That was the Tam O'Shanter, the pub. But the listing didn't give you any protection. And again, I think this is really useful for MD who's going to be involved in the planning. Land use within the CDA. So 1971, that's kind of the percentages. It might not add up to 100 because there might be some I've kind of missed slightly, but deliberately. Shopping. Now, the 1980 is a projection. It's not what happened. So what they wanted to do within the central area is increase the shopping, but crucially, you wanted to reduce the residential. They didn't want folk living in the town centre. They wanted folk out. So if you've still got folk above Duke Street and Waterloo Street, you're out. You're moving to New Farm. You're moving to Belfield. Right? Manufacturing up near the viaduct, 4th Street. Don't want any of their factories anymore. The Glacier, which is Mali now, they had a factory there at a small unit. They want them all out. So I'm kind of thinking 50 years, we're not quite went full circle. We know now we've got to reduce the shopping back down, and we maybe want more people living in the town centre. So this kind of 1970s thing, we're kind of back to where we started. We've went full circle. So these stats are pretty important. So what I'm doing is I'm moving away from the distributor road. I've not got too long to go, don't worry. And I'm moving right into the town centre. This photo is taken at the top of the Lake Kirk. So again, just for some context, that building's Stuart Travel. Seneca, that's what the cross looked like. That's where your statue would be. That's the mall there. See how Duke Street, it was dirty. Smoke for the buildings. See that wee yellow van? That was based in the Murphy's van. That was based in the Murphy's there. See if you could stand there today. You're outside Greg's at the mall. There's your line. The cross is half the size that it was. Up here, surface car park. Piecemeal buildings. There's a Burns Monument Centre to the tower back then. Surface car park. That's where the multi-story is. Again, that's a cracking photo. I've managed to get these digital from black and white originals. Again, people are a wee bit sore about the cross. The cross was beautiful. There's a wee buttonhole round about, flowers, grass, and then at Christmas you'd have the wee lights up and the kids would come out to Duke Street and see the wee kind of Christmas van coming by with all the kind of Christmas carols. The bit straight in front you can see to the viaduct. That was a piecemeal surface car park. There's just wee buildings here and there. And I remember that car park. I was maybe 5 or 6 getting out. And it was just all rubble. You get out and there was huge puddles. And then to the left where 4th Street was, derelict empty buildings. It had to be sorted. Now, when the multi-story comes down, that's kind of the view you're going to get. But not quite, because the mall comes over a wee bit. The mall probably comes over to here. So you're still going to open up the viaduct. So you're going to have this huge open area. And the multi-story is huge. You're not going to realise how big it is till it's away when you see what's left. That's you at the multi-story entrance looking through the multi-story. So you're looking down the way. 4th Street, that's the back of Dick Brothers. There's a lake up. Huge empty space. And again, if we go way back to the 30s, it was just all houses and businesses there. And I know Babs, we were looking at the multi-story and the ironwork on it. That's to do with horses and ironwork, you know, the wee thing in the multi-story. Babs, I think, is it right, great-grandfather, you had a blacksmith's business there, and they moved out in the late 1930s. These buildings were getting cleared because we needed more car parking. So again, there's a lot of social history in that area. And when we get the multi-story cleared, we've got that site, whatever we do with it, you know, there's a lot of good stories in social history there. Moving towards the town centre, again, a bit different. So there's where bank cross staying there. Remember I mentioned The Burns Mall, there's the Burns Mall looking different. That was to be the hotel. There was to be a hotel where the coffee trader is. There's the cinema in the Burns Mall London Road. Multi-storey A at Foregate North, multi-storey B. There's a Foregate. The bus station is exactly where it is today. There's the bus station. And as Barry will know, the compound for doing up the bus station, that's it there. There was to be a 4-storey tower block, just as an office block to be rented out. Never get done. That's why there's a car park up there. And then there's your road decking coming up. That was a service area to get into the Burns Mall, or what was built there. And again, building a road on top of a shopping centre isn't the best idea. But back then, it was all about roads and efficiency, so I kind of understand why it was done. Multi-storey. This is 4th Street here. See this red line? That's 4th Street. That box there is the present multi-storey. 4th Street, which goes back 500 years, goes right through the multi-storey, from roughly where the fish shop is, up to the top corner where the entrance is. And there's another road, that's West George Street, that's the bingo hall here. It comes down here. There's a wee bit here that goes through the multi-storey. And in the corner of the multi-storey, there's remains at East George Street, which are cobbled, which go way back. Again, in front of the multi-storey, we call it the taxi rank. That was to the hotel square. There was our shops and the hotel and the cinema. Again, don't want to get caught up too much in the detail here. That there is King Street. What's really quite interesting in it is the architects are just doing their sums. They're giving floor plans and they're just working out what they can fit in. And it really looks different from what's there. You might see variety shops. These variety shops ended up like Prestos and Tesco's. King Street, you're standing at the crossing looking down. Where it says Jaeger, that is New Look. That was Goldsmiths. That side more or less survives. That side is completely different from what's in the drawing. This is a Foregate. You're not going to be able to read too much. This is the plans for the Foregate. It's just to highlight, you know, they were drawn out and the architects are just getting their pen out and just making wee markings, flat roof here, asphalt here, facing here. This is how the plans were made. These are all sitting up in the Edinburgh originals. So, great photo. That's the Foregate getting built. So there's the Foregate getting built. That's the founds going in for the multi-storey. There's Duke Street, still there. And I sometimes think they might have thought, oh, could we not stop there? See if they'd stopped at that. You might have went, that's fine. We've got Foregate, we've got the multi-storey, but no, they ploughed on and demolished Duke Street after that. Again, you can see the workers don't have any hard hats on. There doesn't look like any headless fence in there, etc. So I'll go through this very quickly. What happened to the hotel and cinema plans? We thought there was a need for a hotel back then at the Cross and the cinema. And then as we go through time, I'm sure you can read it yourself, it gets scrapped. And it was maybe because of the economic downturn, the energy crisis in the 70s and costs. So basically, we ended up with the Burns Mall. The Burns Mall wasn't planned. It wasn't about to happen. It was a last-minute substitute. And it's built out of kit. There's one in Nottingham the same called the Broadmoor. And see if you Google it, you actually think you're looking at the Burns Mall for the moment. So it was built very quickly. It's even the right colour. They built it out of red brick. Kilmarnock's a brown stone town. Anyway, the Burns precinct opened in 1976. And the precinct, people didn't like it. Too American, and it sounds like all these kind of divided areas, so they get changed to the Burns Mall. Quick cross section of it on the planning drawings. That is just outside the coffee trader. Now, you've got the coffee trader, and then these offices up the top. That's where PRA was, and they've moved away. That was actually meant to be the hotel. They actually were going to put the hotel into it, and it never materialised. So that's why you've got that kind of bit at the top. And going down King Street could have been a lot worse. That's a bit that you like kind of be bit that sticks out and folk don't like. There was to be another bit further down. Grafton's is H-Boss, that was there, and then there was to be another wee sticky bit before you reach Boots further down. So that looks really linear and really planned. And that's the kind of thing you used to get in the former Soviet Union. Soviet cities went for that in their planning, just all regular and all planned. So it kind of turned it a wee bit different. I'm nearly there, Claire. There's a photo of the Burns Mall getting built from the multi-storey. You can see the bank of the cross. And what we'll do is, that's a photograph up King Street. There's Woolworths. It was Woolies, by the way. It's new look now. So they actually got to that bit there. I think they could have stopped. There's nothing wrong with these buildings. There's gorgeous bank, they built big pillars, etc. That's already the BHS site. We've got a BHS site that can't get filled. We could have these buildings there. But again, we might have had problems with the buildings, you know, in terms of, because they're older, we might not have got them rented out as such, are filled in today's economic climate. And what I've got two to go. There we are today. One underpass, one multi-storey. There's a town, a pedestrian street. The red is a present one-way system. The purple is what it should have been. So what we have is, it should have come down through the park and up here. So that's why it's at Marlot's Gardens. You've got a bad bend there and a bad bend there, because the road's never finished, the road never got completed. And then up at the bingo hall, there'll be quite a tight turn there as well, because the road should have come across there. So the one-way system has never been finished. What you're seeing in Kilmarnock today is a kind of mix and match. It was kind of half finished and it's created problems. So I didn't mention Irvine. I want to give Claire a wee bit of time at the end, so I'm not going to go on. Irvine and Kilmarnock were meant to kind of merge to be a super city. There's 3 or 4 slides. I'll email them out if you're really interested. But I kind of hope whatever role you've got within the council, it's giving you a wee idea of why the town looks like what it is today. It's kind of been half done. Was it Utopia or Dystopia? I think sometimes halfway in between. You know, Utopia, the idea was you went into the mall, you went into New Prestos, you get your shopping, you took your trolley up the mall, through the 4-gate square, took your bags out, left it, left into the multi-storey and drove home. Brilliant, because before then you were having to go into tiny wee shops or individual shops. But what happened? The lift broke in the multi-storey. The multi-storey, you know, it's kind of low roofed, folk are worried about crime, the mall gets a bit grotty, the trolleys start getting stolen, you know, it just didn't turn out the way it intended. These long streets become wind tunnels, you know, it hasn't aged well. But, you know, as I say, I can see both sides, so I've got maybe 5 or 6 minutes. I'll pass to Claire and then any further questions. And again, if I haven't answered any, I'm quite happy for you to drop Claire or myself an email. So I'll pass back over to Claire.